Ed Sullivan revealed the 7 music legends who were actually evil. The Ed Sullivan Show brought America's living rooms the greatest musical talents of a generation. Every Sunday night, families gathered around their television sets to watch the parade of stars Sullivan had personally selected to entertain the nation. His stamp of approval could launch careers into the stratosphere. But behind Sullivan's famously stiff demeanor and awkward introductions lay a shrewd judge of character. While millions saw only the carefully staged performances, Sullivan witnessed what happened when the cameras stopped rolling. The true nature of these musical icons when they thought no one was watching. Ed ran a family show, revealed a longtime producer who worked closely with Sullivan. He had an almost pathological concern with protecting his audience from anything he considered inappropriate or harmful. This wasn't just about censoring lyrics or dance moves. It was about the character of the performers themselves. In private conversations with close associates, and in personal notes discovered years after his death, Sullivan expressed deep concerns about certain musicians whose talents he admired, but whose personal conduct he found disturbing or even dangerous. These weren't just stars with bad attitudes or demanding writers. These were performers Sullivan came to believe harbored genuine darkness beneath their public personas. Tonight, we reveal the 7 music legends who Sullivan privately described as actually evil. Talented artists whose musical contributions are undeniable, but whose personal conduct ranged from troubling to criminal, from exploitative to violent. These aren't just tales of rock and roll excess, but disturbing patterns that Sullivan recognized early and tried in his own way to shield his audience from. But first, we begin with perhaps the most shocking case. A founding father of rock and roll whose talent was matched only by the scandal that would temporarily destroy his career and the troubling allegations that would follow him for decades. The piano prodigy who married his 13-year-old cousin when Sullivan discovered the truth about Jerry Lee Lewis. He didn't just cancel his next appearance. He blacklisted him for life. And that was before the mysterious deaths began. From Faraday, Louisiana, Jerry Lee Lewis. 1. Jerry Lee Lewis, the killer's darkest secret. When Jerry Lee Lewis took the stage on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1957, he was the very embodiment of rock and roll's dangerous energy. His pounding piano style, wild performance antics, and songs like Whole Lot of Shaking Going On and Great Balls of Fire had earned him the nickname The Killer and positioned him as a potential rival to Elvis Presley for the crown of rock's greatest star. Less than a year later, Lewis's meteoric rise came crashing down when the British press discovered the shocking truth during his UK tour. The 22-year-old Lewis had married his 13-year-old cousin, Myra Gale Brown. Making matters worse, Lewis had lied about her age, claiming she was 15, still scandalously young, but less obviously criminal. Sullivan was furious. He never invited him back, revealed a booking agent who worked at the show during this period. Ed had put his personal stamp of approval on Lewis by featuring him prominently. When the marriage scandal broke, Sullivan felt personally betrayed. He believed Lewis had made him complicit in promoting someone who would do something Sullivan considered fundamentally immoral. Lewis's career in America immediately collapsed. Radio stations stopped playing his records. Venues canceled his concerts. And his appearance fees plummeted from $10,000 per night to $250. While he would eventually rebuild his career in country music, the scandal permanently derailed his trajectory as a mainstream rock and roll pioneer. What Sullivan couldn't have known at the time, but what would gradually emerge over the following decades, was that the Myra Gale Brown scandal was just the beginning of Lewis's troubling history with women. His 7 marriages would be marked by allegations of physical abuse, and 2 of his wives died under circumstances that raised questions. His 4th wife, Jiren Gunn Lewis, drowned in a swimming pool shortly before their divorce was finalized. And his 5th wife, Shawn Michelle Stevens, died of a methadone overdose just 77 days after their wedding. Sullivan had a sixth sense about performers with dangerous tendencies, noted a television historian who studied Sullivan's career. His refusal to have Lewis back wasn't just about the scandal itself, but about what Sullivan perceived as a fundamental character flaw. Time would prove that instinct correct as Lewis's life became marked by violence, substance abuse, and tragedy. while Lewis remained a towering musical influence, whose piano style and unbridled performance energy shaped rock and roll. Sullivan's early recognition of his troubling personal conduct represented one of the host's most significant stands against a major talent on moral grounds. James Brown dazzled audiences with his electric performances, but backstage, Sullivan witnessed a different man entirely. "That man has a devil inside him," Sullivan confided to his producer. The godfather of soul's violent rap sheet would prove Sullivan right. So we are delighted to present James Brown on our stage on this show. So let's have a fine welcome for a very fine talent. To James Brown, the Godfather's Dark Kingdom. James Brown revolutionized American music with his dynamic performances, pioneering funk sound and unmatched work ethic. When he appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show, his electrifying stage presence and precision-drilled band delivered performances so powerful that Sullivan, not known for awesome praise, called him the hardest-working man in show business, a nickname that stuck throughout Brown's career. Behind the sequin jumpsuits and cape flourishes, however, lurked a man whose behavior off-stage revealed a disturbing pattern of violence, control, and criminality that Sullivan reportedly found deeply troubling. "He made crowds scream and women fear him," said a former associate who worked backstage during several of Brown's Sullivan appearances. Ed was old-school entertainment. He believed stars should be grateful, humble, and professional. Brown was none of those things. He demanded absolute control, treated his band like servants, and had a god complex that Sullivan found disturbing. Brown's criminal history began before fame and continued throughout his career. His rap sheet included multiple arrests for domestic violence against different wives and girlfriends, weapons charges, and drug possession. His volatile temper and controlling behavior became legendary in the music industry, with band members subjected to harsh fines for minor infractions like scuff shoes or missed dance steps. Sullivan allegedly said Brown had a devil's energy in him, recalled a production assistant who overheard a conversation between Sullivan and his producer. He respected Brown's talent enormously, but was disturbed by the stories that circulated about his treatment of women and his band members. There was something in Brown that Sullivan found genuinely concerning beyond typical star behavior. Perhaps most disturbing were the allegations of domestic abuse that followed Brown throughout his life. Multiple wives and girlfriends came forward with stories of brutal beatings, including his third wife, Adrienne Lois Rodriguez, who filed for divorce and multiple assault charges against him, then reconciled, only to die under somewhat mysterious circumstances in 1996 following cosmetic surgery. While Sullivan continued to book Brown due to his undeniable talent and audience appeal, staff members recalled that Sullivan maintained a professional distance from the performer that differed markedly from his warm relationships with other regular guests. Sullivan was trapped in a dilemma with Brown, explained a music historian. He couldn't deny Brown's cultural importance and musical genius, but he was deeply uncomfortable with aspects of his character. It created a strange dynamic where Sullivan would praise Brown's performances effusively on air while expressing private reservations about the man himself. Brown's musical legacy remained secure. His innovations shaped funk, soul, disco, and later hip-hop through extensive sampling of his work. But Sullivan's early recognition of the troubling aspects of Brown's personality proved prescient as allegations and criminal charges accumulated throughout the performer's life. Chuck Berry created rock and roll as we know it, and a criminal record so disturbing that Sullivan vowed never to book him again. One performance was all it took for Sullivan to see what Berry's adoring fans couldn't. Let's turn him loose. Ladies and gentlemen, Chuck Berry, Sweet Little Three. Chuck Berry, rock's pioneer with a prison record. When Chuck Berry performed Maybelline on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1955, he was introducing America to a new sound that would help define rock and roll for generations to come. His distinctive guitar style, charismatic stage presence, and storytelling lyrics about teenage life revolutionized popular music and influenced everyone from the Beatles to the Rolling Stones. Sullivan initially embraced Berry as an exciting new talent, but their relationship reportedly soured as details of Berry's criminal history and ongoing legal troubles became increasingly difficult to ignore. Sullivan booked him once and regretted it forever, claimed a staff writer who worked on the Ed Sullivan Show during this period. Berry was brilliant on camera, but Sullivan was horrified when he learned more about Berry's past and his ongoing legal issues. It created a real conflict for Ed, who believed in second chances, but also felt responsible for who he presented to American families. Berry's troubled history began before fame with a 1944 armed robbery conviction that sent him to a reformatory until age 21. His most serious legal issue came in 1959 when he was arrested for violating the Mann Act, transporting a 14-year-old girl across state lines for immoral purposes. The girl had been working as a hat-check girl at Berry's club, and he had allegedly brought her to St. Louis to work at his bandstand. Berry was eventually convicted and served 20 months in prison. This conviction occurred during the height of Berry's popularity, creating a significant problem for Sullivan, who prided himself on presenting performers who upheld certain moral standards. While Berry would eventually return to performing after his release, his relationship with Sullivan's show was permanently damaged. Chuck Berry was a musical genius, but Sullivan couldn't reconcile that with Berry's criminal behavior, explained a cultural historian who studied early rock and roll television appearances. Sullivan was willing to forgive certain transgressions, but crimes involving minors crossed a line he wasn't willing to ignore, no matter how talented the performer. Berry's legal troubles continued throughout his career, including tax evasion charges, and most disturbingly, a 1990 class action lawsuit from women who alleged they had been videotaped in the bathroom of a restaurant Berry owned. He eventually settled the lawsuit for a reported $1.2 million. What makes Berry's case particularly complex is the undeniable impact of his music contrasted with his troubling personal conduct. His innovative guitar work, distinctive sound, and compositions like Johnny B. Good, Roll Over Beethoven, and rock and roll music literally defined rock music and influenced generations of musicians who followed. Sullivan was caught in the difficult position of recognizing Berry's revolutionary musical contributions while being deeply troubled by his personal conduct, noted the historian. It represented one of the earliest examples of the separation of art from artist that continues to challenge the entertainment industry today. Sullivan famously refused to show Elvis's hips on television. The real reason, not the dancing, but what Sullivan called a disturbing pattern with young female fans that left him deeply concerned about the King's private appetites. Peace in the Valley. Here is Elvis Presley. 4. Elvis Presley, the King's controversial court. Elvis Presley's appearances on The Ed Sullivan Show in 1956 and 1957 remain among the most famous moments in television history. Performances so electrifying that they helped transform American popular culture overnight. Sullivan initially refused to book Presley due to concerns about his provocative performance style, only relenting after competing programs featured him to massive ratings. Sullivan's decision to censor Presley by filming him only from the waist up during his final appearance has become legendary, a moment that perfectly captured the generational divide between post-war youth culture and the established entertainment guardians. Sullivan saw the worship and feared the man behind it, said a former Sullivan staff member. What people don't realize is that Sullivan's concerns about Elvis went beyond the hip swinging. Ed was genuinely worried about the almost religious devotion Elvis inspired in young people, especially girls. He thought there was something unhealthy about it, something potentially exploitative. Sullivan's unease about Presley's influence represents one of his more controversial judgments. Unlike others on this list, Elvis had no known criminal record or documented cases of abuse. However, retrospective examinations of Presley's relationships have raised questions about certain patterns in his personal life. Most notably, Priscilla Beaulieu began her relationship with Elvis when she was just 14 years old and he was 24. Though they didn't marry until she was 21, Priscilla later revealed that their relationship included controlling behavior with Elvis, shaping everything from her appearance to her movements. Additionally, biographers have documented Presley's apparent preference for very young virginal women whom he could mold to his specifications. Sullivan wasn't privy to the details of Elvis's private life, but he sensed something in the dynamic between Elvis and his young female fans that troubled him, explained a cultural historian. It wasn't just moral panic about rock and roll. It was concern about the power imbalance between an adult male star and the teenage girls who idolized him. What makes Sullivan's judgment of Elvis particularly interesting is how it evolved over time. After initially resisting booking Presley, then censoring his performances, Sullivan eventually praised Elvis publicly, telling the audience after one performance, "This is a real, decent fine boy." This public endorsement came as Presley's management worked to soften his image, suggesting that Sullivan's concerns were partially addressed by the careful image control implemented by Colonel Tom Parker, Presley's manager. However, staff members reported that Sullivan maintained private reservations about Elvis's influence on youth culture. Elvis remains a complicated case on Sullivan's list, noted the historian. Unlike the others, there's no clear criminal behavior or documented abuse. But Sullivan's concerns about the power dynamics between adult male performers and young female fans raised questions that the entertainment industry continues to grapple with today. While audiences enjoyed Phil Spector's Wall of Sound, Sullivan warned his staff, "Keep that man off my show." Decades before Spector murdered an actress in his mansion, Sullivan had already identified him as genuinely dangerous. 5. Phil Spector, the sound of genius and madness. Phil Spector never appeared as a performer on The Ed Sullivan Show, but his musical influence was inescapable throughout the 1960s.